Hello, my friend. Think about your lunchbox today.
Maybe you had an aloo parantha or a delicious sandwich with tomato ketchup.
Now, what if I told you that just 500 years ago, our great 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 grandparents in India had never seen a potato, a tomato, or even a chili?
Sounds crazy, right? But it's true. These foods traveled thousands of kilometers across oceans to reach our kitchens.
This journey of food, people, ideas, and even money is what we call globalization.
We will travel through time to see how traders, travelers, and even certain foods and germs linked continents across centuries.
We will look at ancient roots, huge wars, and how India played a crucial role in shaping this global world. Long ago, even before our great 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 grandparents were born, the world was already connected.
For thousands of years, people were just like us, curious and always on the move. They traveled for knowledge, for new opportunities, or sometimes just in search of peace.
Think about the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization from our history books. As far back as 3000 BCE, they were busy trading with places we now call West Asia.
It's like they had an ancient coastal highway for ships. And get this, tiny seashells called cowries traveled all the way from the Maldives to China and Africa, used as money.
But the real superstar of ancient connections was the Silk Route. Imagine a massive network of roads like an ancient internet connecting Asia with Europe and North Africa.
It wasn't carrying data, but something just as precious, shiny, beautiful silk from China. That's how it got its name.
But it wasn't just about silk. From India, wonderful textiles and fragrant spices traveled west, and in return, precious gold and silver flowed from Europe into Asia. It was a grand exchange.
This internet didn't just carry things, it carried ideas.
The peaceful teachings of Buddhism traveled from eastern India all the way to the rest of Asia through these very routes.
Later, Christian and Muslim preachers also used these paths to share their beliefs.
Now let's talk about food. Do you love noodles? Well, guess what?
Noodles actually traveled from China and over time became spaghetti, pasta in Italy.
And many of our daily essentials, potatoes, tomatoes, chilies, corn, and even groundnuts were completely unknown in India 500 years ago.
They were brought all the way from the Americas after Christopher Columbus accidentally bumped into the continent.
Imagine a life without samosas with potato filling or paneer makhani with tomato gravy. Thanks, explorers. The humble potato actually helped the poor in Europe eat better and live longer.
As centuries passed, European sailors found a sea route to Asia and crossed the mighty oceans to the Americas.
And our Indian subcontinent was always a VIP hub in this network, a crucial junction in the busy Indian Ocean trade.
But, my friend, this story has a dark twist. When the Spanish and Portuguese went to conquer the Americas, their most powerful weapon wasn't a sword or a cannon.
It was something invisible and deadly: germs. They carried diseases like smallpox.
The people of America had been isolated for millions of years, so their bodies had no defense against these new germs.
The disease spread like a forest fire, wiping out entire communities. It was this invisible enemy that made the European conquest so easy.
It's a sad reminder that connection can sometimes bring great danger.
Until the 1700s, India and China were like the rich kings of world trade.
But then, China decided to limit its contact with the outside world, kind of like leaving the global WhatsApp group.
As America grew more important, the center of world trade slowly drifted west, and Europe began to take the lead.
The 1800s were a time of massive, world-changing shifts. It was like the world suddenly switched to high-speed internet.
Economists say this global connection happened through three big flows: the flow of trade, labor, and capital;
The flow of trade, movement of goods like cotton or wheat;
the flow of labor, migration of people searching for jobs;
the movement of capital, money invested for short or long terms over long distances.
These three flows were connected like a kulfi, a stick, and someone to eat it.
A huge change happened in Britain. For a long time, they tried to grow all their own food. But as more people were born, food got expensive.
The government had a rule called the Corn Laws, which blocked cheaper corn from being imported.
After the corn laws were removed, Britain was suddenly flooded with cheap food from abroad.
This was bad news for British farmers who couldn't compete.
Many lost their lands and had to move to cities or even to other countries like America and Australia to find work.
This created a massive demand for food. So, countries like America, Russia, and Australia started clearing forests and creating huge farms to grow food for Britain.
To get all this food to the ports, they needed railways and new harbors. This required two things: money, capital, which flowed from London, and workers, labor.
About 50 million people left Europe for America and Australia to build these new lives.
By 1890, a global agricultural economy had fully formed. Food came from thousands of miles away, grown by workers on large farms.
Closer home, in Punjab, the British built a huge network of canals to grow wheat and cotton to be exported to England.
These areas were called the Canal Colonies. India became a massive supplier of raw materials like cotton and rubber for British factories.
Between 1820 and 1914, world trade grew by an unbelievable 25 to 40 times.
Technology was the magic wand in this story. The railways, steamships, and the telegraph were like the superheroes of the 19th century. They made transport faster and cheaper.
A great example is the meat trade. Before the 1870s, live animals were shipped from America to Europe.
Many died or got sick on the long journey, making meat a luxury for the rich. Then came the game changer: refrigerated ships.
Now animals could be slaughtered in America and the frozen meat could be shipped easily.
The price of meat dropped so much that even poor families in Europe could afford it. Better food meant better lives.
But this era had a dark side. Colonialism, European powers weren't just trading, they were conquering.
In 1885, they literally sat down at a meeting in Berlin and divided Africa among themselves like pieces of a cake without asking a single African person.
This led to terrible suffering. Take the story of Rinderpest, a cattle disease. In Africa, wealth was measured in cattle and people lived freely.
The Europeans wanted to build mines and plantations, but couldn't find workers because the Africans didn't need to work for wages.
So the colonizers imposed heavy taxes and changed laws to force them to work.
Then Rinderpest arrived in the 1880s from Asia with infected cattle. It spread like a plague, killing 90% of Africa's cattle.
With their livelihoods destroyed, the proud African people had no choice but to work for the Europeans in mines and plantations to survive.
Another sad story from this time is that of indentured labor.
This was a system where poor laborers from India were tricked into signing contracts to work for 5 years in faraway lands to pay for their journey.
They were promised a good life and a return ticket.
Hundreds of thousands of Indians from places like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Tamil Nadu left their homes because they were in debt and had no work.
They were shipped to the Caribbean islands, Mauritius, and Fiji to work on sugar plantations.
The agents who hired them often lied about the work and the living conditions.
It was so bad that people called it a new system of slavery. Workers faced horrible conditions and had little hope.
But even in that darkness, they found ways to survive. They created new, vibrant cultures by mixing their traditions with new ones.
In Trinidad, the Muharram procession transformed into a massive carnival called Hosay. The famous chutney music is another beautiful fusion or creation from this time.
And you know what? The descendants of these brave laborers have become world famous.
Cricketers like Shivnarine Chanderpaul and Ramnaresh Sarwan and the Nobel Prize-winning writer V.S. Naipaul all trace their roots back to these Indian indentured workers.
Isn't that incredible? By the 1900s, our nationalist leaders protested this cruel system and it was finally stopped in 1921.
Indian traders and bankers like the Shikaripuri Shroffs and Nattukotai Chettiars also played a big role, funding agriculture and trade all across Asia.
But what about India's own industries? For centuries, India was famous for its fine cotton textiles.
But when Britain built its own giant textile mills, they put heavy taxes on Indian cloth to stop it from competing.
As a result, India went from being a top exporter of finished cloth to just an exporter of raw cotton.
Britain also forced Indian farmers to grow opium, which they sold to China to pay for their own tea addiction.
Basically, Britain sold more to India than it bought from us.
They used this profit to balance their expenses with other countries. In a way, India's wealth was helping Britain run its global empire and pay for its official salaries and pensions.
The first half of the 20th century was marked by huge wars and economic crashes.
The First World War, 1914 to 1918, was a clash of giants. On one side were the Allies, Britain, France, Russia, later US, and on the other, the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary.
This wasn't a war fought with swords and horses, it was the world's first modern industrial war.
Machine guns, tanks, aircraft, and poison gas, all products of modern factories, were used to cause destruction on a scale never seen before.
Around 9 million people died and 20 million were injured. It was a tragedy that shook the world.
The war completely changed the economic map. Britain, once the world's bank, had to borrow huge amounts of money from the USA.
This turned the US from a country that owed money, a debtor, to a country that loaned money, a creditor. After the war, America was the new financial superpower.
For Britain, recovery was tough. They were in massive debt to the US. While they were busy fighting, industries in India and Japan had grown stronger.
The war boom ended, and suddenly millions of British workers were without jobs.
The war had also turned farmers in Canada, America, and Australia into major wheat producers.
But when the war ended and European farms started producing again, there was suddenly too much wheat in the world. Prices crashed and farmers everywhere were left in deep debt. The US, however, recovered much faster. The 1920s were a roaring time for them, thanks to one big idea: mass production.
A car maker named Henry Ford became a legend for this. He used the assembly line method in his factory.
The assembly line system forced workers to repeat a single and same task mechanically at a pace set by a conveyor belt, which increased output per worker.
The T-model Ford was the world's first mass-produced car.
This system made cars cheaper. Ford also did something clever. He doubled his workers' wages.
This meant his own workers could now afford to buy the cars they were making.
Soon people were buying everything: refrigerators, radios, washing machines on credit, paying in easy installments. It was a boom funded by loans.
In 1929, the world plunged into the Great Depression. It was a catastrophic economic crisis that lasted for about 10 years.
Factories shut down, people lost their jobs, and trade collapsed. It was like someone had suddenly hit the pause button on the world's economy.
So, what caused this huge crash?
Too much produce. Farmers were producing so much food that prices fell through the floor. They couldn't even make enough money to cover their costs.
US loan withdrawal. Many countries depended on loans from the US. But when the crisis hit, US lenders panicked and stopped giving out loans, causing a massive shock worldwide.
Protectionism. To protect its own economy, the US doubled taxes on imported goods. This was a huge blow to world trade.
The Great Depression hit India hard too. Our exports and imports were cut in half. Wheat prices in India fell by 50%.
The peasants suffered the most. Even though they were earning less, the colonial government refused to lower their taxes.
The jute farmers of Bengal were ruined as demand for gunny bags collapsed. They fell deeper and deeper into debt.
A popular Bengali poem from that time captures their sadness. Grow more jute, brothers, with the hope of greater cash. Costs and debts of jute will make your hopes get dashed.
To pay their taxes and daily expenses, many Indian families had to sell their family gold and silver.
All this gold was exported to Britain, helping their recovery, but doing nothing for the struggling Indian farmer.
It was during this time of great unrest in rural India that Mahatma Gandhi launched the civil disobedience movement in 1931.
Just 2 decades after the first one, the world was tragically dragged into the Second World War, 1939 to 1945.
This time, it was the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, Italy, against the Allies, Britain, France, Soviet Union, US.
The destruction was even more horrifying. Over 60 million people were killed, and for the first time, more civilians died than soldiers.
After the war ended, the world had learned two very important lessons from the chaos of the Great Depression.
An industrial country needs mass consumption. For people to buy lots of things, they need stable jobs and good incomes.
Governments must step in to manage the economy. They can't just leave everything to the market.
To create a stable and predictable economic system, leaders from the Allied nations met in a place called Bretton Woods in the USA in 1944.
They created a framework to manage the world's money and trade.
This meeting gave birth to two very important organizations, IMF and World Bank, often called the Bretton Woods Twins.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF. Imagine it as the world's financial referee, helping countries manage their trade balances so no one gets into too much trouble.
The World Bank. Its job was to lend money to help rebuild Europe after the war.
This new system was based on fixed exchange rates. This meant every country's currency, like the Indian rupee, was pegged to the US dollar at a fixed price.
The dollar, in turn, was linked to gold. This brought a lot of stability.
For the next 20 years, from the 1950s to the 1970s, this system led to an era of incredible growth for Western countries and Japan.
But what about countries like India? After World War II, many nations in Asia and Africa finally won their independence from colonial rule.
But they were left extremely poor. The IMF and World Bank were mostly designed to help the rich industrial countries.
So, these newly independent nations decided to form their own team. They created a group called the G77.
They demanded a new international economic order, NIEO, where they would have real control over their own natural resources, get fairer prices for their raw materials, and be able to sell their manufactured goods in rich countries.
By the 1970s, the Bretton Woods system started to crack. The US was no longer as powerful as it used to be, and the dollar's value began to fall.
The fixed exchange rate system collapsed and was replaced by a floating exchange rate system, where currency values change every day, like stock prices.
From the late 1970s, another big change happened.
Huge companies known as multinational corporations, MNCs, started shifting their factories from Europe and America to low-wage Asian countries.
Why? Because it was much cheaper to make things there.
Countries like China offered very low wages, so it became the world's favorite destination for investment.
You've probably seen Made in China on countless products.
This shift of industry to countries like China, India, and Brazil has completely changed the world's economic geography in our lifetime.
So, what a journey it has been. We've seen that our world has been connected for thousands of years, like a giant spider web.
From the ancient silk routes carrying spices and ideas to the tragic journeys of germs and indentured laborers.
The 19th century pulled this web even tighter with railways and steamships, creating a global farm, but also bringing the darkness of colonialism.
Epic events like the World Wars and the Great Depression totally reshuffled the world's powers, making the US a new global leader.
This led to the creation of institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to keep the global economy stable.
And through it all, developing countries like ours have fought for a fairer system, forming groups like the G77 to make their voices heard.
This long, complex, and fascinating story of the flow of trade, people, and money is what has made the global world we live in today.
It's like a massive, delicious biryani with ingredients, spices, and stories mixed in from every corner of the planet over many, many centuries.
Got any questions? Ask in the comments below. We are here to help. Subscribe for more. And let's keep learning together. That's a wrap. Now go out there and amaze the world with what you've learned. See you in the next one.